truth of the matter is, as was mentioned, this trip came about because for the first time in history, the history of AIPAC, the history of Judea and Samaria, the YESHA Council, we received an official invitation to come and take part in the AIPAC policy conference. Not just take part, but actually be given one of these to speak and express our opinions. And I think AIPAC it took them a long time to do that job, but they definitely deserve applause for actually reaching that decision. And we hope that this year's performance was convincing enough to make sure that they invite us again for next year. We were given one slot, one panel under the title of Catch 67. The room was a room of 400 people. It was packed with people that were standing just like you. I couldn't offer them any more seats because they were all occupied. And basically, I was surrounded with two ladies on my right and on my left who were trying to argue as to why we are not right. And I started off my presentation there saying, it was in the morning, so I said, you know, some of us woke up this morning because we had an alarm clock. Some of us woke up because they're just natural risers in the morning. And there's one family who woke up because a missile decided to come and visit. And that missile didn't just decide to come and visit, it actually decided to demolish their house. And not just demolish their house, but injure 6 innocent people. Now, if you think that that house is in the disputed territories, on the other side of the Green Line, in the conflict zone, it is against international law, it has some building violations, it hasn't improved by the American administration, you're mistaken. It's in the center of Israel. Now, if you can explain to me what's the justification for sending a missile over to that house, then we can start the discussion. Whether 1 state, 2 state, yes, 67, not 67. But there's absolutely no justification for that poor family to wake up with a missile who decided to come and destroy their house. And from there, things just became worse and worse. Basically, at the end of the day, I don't think they were really happy with my appearance there, but we'll see if we get an extended invitation for next year. You can only imagine what we said, what we tried to convey, and I'm thinking in that respect, there's nobody better than Prime Minister Netanyahu who put it in so simple words that the conflict is all about Arab recognition of the right of Jewish people to have a Jewish state. It begins there and it ends there. And we couldn't have asked for a better phrase, as President Trump has put it this week. I'm just doing what the facts on the ground are. That's it. Okay? President Trump is very good in conveying very simple, short messages. And you know, we've been talking about for 50, 51, 52 years about this conflict, the dispute. Call it whatever you want. But at the essence of it, there are facts on the ground. It's recognition of the right of the Jewish people. And that's where we lie. So if you want to ask me that question of why the Palestinians will never agree for a Jewish state, so I don't know if I completely agree with the title, why will they never agree? Because I was brought up under the notion, never say never, you know. Mashiach might come, or Mashiach will come. He will come. When he comes, they might then realize and accept and understand. I don't know what to predict what's going to be the future. I can definitely explain the challenges in which we live today. I can definitely explain why today it is hard to foresee any Arab leader, and it doesn't matter if it's this administration or it's going to be the next administration. I don't think there's going to be any change in their attitude. We saw the change of guards between Arafat and Abu Mazen. Nothing really changed. The challenge is the same. And just before we left Israel, we did see something very new and surprising, that for almost the first time, there was a protest in Gaza, but instead of it being addressed towards the state of Israel, like it's usually shifted and diverted, the people in Gaza went out in the streets to protest against Hamas. And unfortunately, like many other instances, it wasn't that widely reported. But I think that is a light at the end of the tunnel that we should try and expand as much as possible. Because if we can get people to convey the message that there are people who are not happy with the current Palestinian administration, whether it's in Ramallah, led by the PLO, or it's in Gaza, led by Hamas, then we have a hope that something will come up from the ground which will be different and will put other things at the top of the interests. As Chief Foreign Envoy, I get all sorts of interesting guests. The easiest ones to host are the ZOA delegations, the students that you bring that want to be trained to be our combat fighters in the campuses. They're extremely enthusiastic youngsters that it's extremely fun to address, load with ammunition that they can go to the front lines and do what needs to be done on campuses. But some are very challenging. Okay? And I had a group organized by the Brookings Institute, okay, which is completely not the type of people that I know that are sitting in the room at the moment. And I suggested to them in one of the meetings, in order to try and put them in the right direction, I said to them, why don't we go and do a survey within the Palestinian Authority? What are the 5 topics of main interest, of main concern for the Palestinian people? Why is that interesting? Because if we will know what is bothering them, if we will know what is troubling them, then it will give us an idea, us, Israel, the international community, the United States, an ability to focus on the problems which are on stack and try and solve them. I'm willing to take bets that within the first 5 topics, we won't find issues of nationality, passports, none of those major topics which are on the table. We will probably find issues of food, working places, health issues, raising up kids. You know what? Things which bother every single person sitting in this room, in my house in Israel, that's what we're bothered about. But they didn't take the challenge, and when we don't know what the Palestinian people are bothered about, what's troubling them, then we're completely offshore. There isn't, you know what, I won't say there isn't, but the majority of the delegations coming from the United States come, attack me, accuse me. The Palestinian people don't have equal rights. You've heard that before? I thought it was a revolution. Okay, they all come with that accusation. They all fail to understand that the Oslo Accord, which today we know was an experiment which failed, tried to establish a Palestinian state and has determined that the Palestinian people will have voting rights for the Palestinian administration. Voting rights? They haven't had the right to vote for their administration for over 13 years. I don't want to govern them. I don't want to rule them. I don't want to impose on them methods of governing that we have on ourselves. But I haven't seen any Arab Palestinian going out to the streets protesting, we want our voting rights. I was here on the weekend of the inauguration. I saw a few ladies with pink hats protesting about the results of the elections. Okay, not agreeing with the results. But the discussion was whether the results were for or against. The issue was the actual election. Okay? You saw a vibrant discussion, whether you agreed with it or not. It was on the table. You haven't seen one Palestinian going out to the street. Like I saw 500,000 ladies in DC going to protest, we want our right to vote. Now, people who come from the United States, people who've seen what happened here in the weekend of the inauguration, people who go and express their opinions in the ballots or anywhere else, I don't know how much they can actually grasp the idea of people who don't have the freedom to vote, to express their opinions, and to influence who is governing them. So let's start with the issue of defense. I tell this to all your student delegations that when they come, I literally look at it like a mentoring class. I want to give you ideas as to how to combat the challenges that you're facing in campus. Okay? I don't need to advocate why we live in Judea and Samaria. I don't need to convince them that we are doing the right thing. They're already on board. I need to fill them in with tools as to how to battle the challenge that they're facing. So when I have liberal groups who come and they accuse me of the security barrier that the state of Israel has built, that as depriving people of freedom of movement. They can't move freely. You know, all that democracy upbringing, which I'm not cynical about because we share the same values, but we are aware, at least the ones who live in my city, that the people next door, they don't necessarily share the same importance of what we believe in or what the forefathers have written about and fought in. And the issue of the barrier always comes up. I'm told I wasn't privileged enough to go into Bethlehem. I'm not allowed to go into Bethlehem. There's a new museum in Bethlehem. The horror of the security barrier, the separation fence, the apartheid fence. And I can have a delegation of 150 students from Georgetown University or Columbia University. The Georgetown ones are always second-degree ones already working in the State Department. I can only visual that one of them will be one day the ambassador of the United States in Israel. These are the people we're addressing. So how do you explain seeing the horrific pictures from Bethlehem of the security barrier when you come to the other side? There's a shortage of water on one side, there's a flourishing and vibrant community on the other side. And I say to them the following thing. It wasn't our choice to build a barrier. The barrier wasn't always there. The barrier was built because the reality was that there was no one single day that in the end of the 1990s, the beginning of 2000, that the people of Israel didn't wake up and see pictures on the daily newspaper of tens of people that were killed by suicide bombers. When there's pressure on the government to do decisions, there's not enough time to think them through. And the government of the state of Israel decided, let's build a security barrier to stop the suicide bombers crossing from one side to another. Okay? First of all, let's get the history in the background. Now, this is where the line which I tell your students, which becomes important. I'm one of those who believes that fences create a sense of security. They don't actually provide security. And when I have a liberal group, what I will say to them is, I believe in building bridges. I don't believe in building fences. You as Americans understand why that line is attractive for the other camp, right? But let me explain why I said I believe in building bridges and not building fences. Because what do we have in the Gaza Strip? We've built the security barrier. Why did we build it? We didn't want any terrorists to cross over. What do we get in the first instance? What? Missiles. Okay, missiles. And what do? Phone the ZOA, another few organizations. Hey guys, we need some cash. Put your influence. The cash comes in. Our engineers work on the technology. We invent imaginary technology called Iron Dome. We can catch missiles, rockets at any time, at any height. You just challenge us, we're there. And what are we? Extremely successful. So what do we do? Or what do they do when they see that we're successful? No. Dig tunnels. What do we do? Press recall, ZOA, hey, we need some more cash, put some more influence and capital, send us some, we need it urgently. The cash comes in, the engineers are being called, we develop new technology, and today we have the ability to identify tunnels before they pop up. They see we're successful, what do? They attack us with kites and balloons. Whilst we have invented this imaginary science fiction technology, they're attacking us with the most primitive children's game from the beach. It's an endless battle of raising the fence and lowering the fence. Now, I don't know how, but the people of Efrat, the people who established Efrat, Rav Riskin, some other partners from Israel, when they planned building the city of Efrat, they had a vision of building a city which is not surrounded by a fence. Why? Different reasons. Some of them came from Europe. They didn't want to have the stories or the feeling of the people who left in Europe, the ghetto. Some said, when we sing the national anthem, Liot Am Chofshi Be'artzenu, we want to feel that we are a free nation in our country, and we don't want to be surrounded by a fence. Some of them said, when you'll build the fence, the other side will build up until the fence because the border is very clearly marked. We prefer that there is some sort of vagueness. So for me, when I have delegations and they come to Efrat, which is an extremely awkward-looking city, how many of you have been in Efrat? Okay, those who haven't, you need to come quickly. It's not a matter of where it's going, it's a matter of how can you tell the story without actually being in Efrat. And it's changing. So it's better to come and see before and after. Efrat is growing today by 60%. So those of you who were there yesterday saw 12,000 people. If you come next year, there will be already 16,000 people. Okay? So Efrat is a very weird looking shaped city. From one end to another, it's 5.5 miles. The width of it at the most narrowest place is no more than a traffic circle. That's a challenge, a traffic circle, a roundabout if you're from England. Okay? Now, when I became mayor, I asked myself, how am I supposed to protect this long stretch of a hot dog or a sausage, depends from which part of the world you come from. Because some of you might remember, at least when I was a kid, my parents used to show me those black and white restaurant movies where there was a long trail of wagons with cowboys, and all of a sudden came the Indians from the hilltops, and there was always the same scene. The first cowboy to notice the first Indian, what was his response? Thank you, circle the wagons. Why circle the wagons? You create a central element which is easier to protect. Now I can be the most talented mayor upon earth, the most successful mayor upon earth. I can shout out in case of an emergency security crisis, circle the houses. You all understand that you're being extremely polite as to how my residents will treat me. I can't circle the houses. So how am I supposed to provide security to my residents? And the founders of the city, their idea was that if they will build the city, or they will plan the city, and build it in a specific way, they will be able to create a reality that there's no need to surround the city with a fence. And what did they do? They planned the city and built it only on land which was owned by private Jewish individuals, or land which was declared state land, leaving islands and patches of land which is owned by private Arab individuals, not depriving them of access to their land, not interfering with what they do with their land, not interfering with what they grow and where they market it. And when our Arab neighbors see that we actually don't touch their land, there becomes a reality up until today, 35 years later, that Efrat is still not surrounded by a fence. The peak of the relationship is 2 incidents where we had the head of Wadi Nis, one of the neighboring Arab villages, phoned the head of Efrat at that time and say to him, listen, we see some suspicious movement of people who are trying to trespass towards Efrat. We suggest you go and check it out. And sure enough, on both those incidents, it was terrorists who wanted to do a terrorist attack on Efrat. Now, I'm not naive. I understand that we're not living in utopia. And I understand that there are people who are against us. So today we are surrounded by a virtual fence composed of cameras and radars. The level of security that the residents of Efrat enjoy is much higher than any other city in Israel. Approximately once in every 6 weeks, we have an attempt of trespassers who want to try and break into Efrat. We always catch them in a distance that none of the residents of Efrat even hear about the event. We hand them over to the police and to the army. We get accused of stopping people before they're red-handed. As far as I'm concerned, my top priority is that my residents will carry on sleeping peacefully at night, and that's the way we try and achieve things. But if we go back to the barrier, if we go back to the fence, if we go back to any acknowledgement of thinking of any bunker that we built, we know, we understand that you can think of the most secure bunker. It only means that you're raising the challenge of the person who wants to break into it as to how much effort he needs to put into it. The truth of the matter is, there's absolutely no shortcut between building the bridges between the people, building the trust between the people. You can put a lock at the entrance to your door, the entrance to your house. That lock is basically a sign saying, this is an agreement between 2 people who obey the law. You don't go past this line. Anybody who wants to break in through the lock, it's not that of a big challenge. So when you deal with people who obey the law on both sides, a simple lock is enough. When you don't, you raise the challenge. And this is where it brings me to the second story that I was asked to share. I came back, I think it was actually, I came back from the inauguration. No, came back from the IAC actually. The IAC in DC, Sheldon Adelson's convention. And I land in Israel and I get an invitation to be back in DC 2 weeks later. Now you have to understand that I'm a mayor. I have to run a city. I have to raise donations to run the city. I don't really have time to go back and forth to DC. I'm not the ZOA that's what they do all the time, just go down to Capitol Hill and do policy meetings. But on the letter, there was a signature of Chaim Saban inviting me to come and address his conference. Now, you don't get every day an invitation from Chaim Saban. And I understood that this is an opportunity. So I go to DC again. And it took place literally, I think like 2-3 weeks after the elections. It was a bit like entering a Shiva house, if you understand the atmosphere that was there. They were counting on having Mrs. whatever her name is as the guest of honor, okay? The list of people who invited slightly changed. At that time, she was still not doing any public appearances. And it was literally after the elections. It was before the change of administration. And for me as a mayor, this was already a second trip just in 1 month. Things became a bit hectic. But at the end of the session that day, I hear rumors in the background. Is the parliament being assembled? Now, I know I'm not a member of parliament, so I just carry on minding my own business, walking out. All of a sudden, somebody grabs me on my shoulder and says, you, in here. Takes me into a room actually about the size of this room, maybe slightly bigger. The setup was slightly different. There was a bar with alcoholic drinks down there. There was no big table. There was a big circle of chairs. And in the room, I see the former chiefs of staff, former heads of Mossad, former heads of Shabak, all the top journalists from Israel, former ministers, all the big shots. way beyond my league. There's a big circle of chairs, and in the middle there are two chairs. I'm minding my own business. All of a sudden, Chaim Saban takes his glass, bangs it, everybody takes their seat. Before I can sit down, somebody grabs my hand. Chaim Saban says to me, "You sit here." Puts me in the middle of the circle. I understand I'm the center of attention. I don't know what to anticipate what's coming up next. Chaim Saban starts and says, "Listen, guys, Martin has just showed me a presentation. Or actually at lunchtime he showed me a presentation which I'm beyond it. It's way beyond what I can even explain to you. And I would like to share it with you. Martin, you can start." Martin Indyk prepared a presentation of a 3-slide show. Israel is lying, there's no two-state solution. A presentation of the map of the state of Israel with the green line marked in bold line, if you can do such a thing. And then it all turns into red. Basically, putting all the cities, towns, settlements, all the Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria in one big red blob. Chaim Saban turns to me and he says, "Oded, what have you got to say?" I took a deep breath. I've never seen this map before. It didn't look real, and I didn't prepare my answer. So I tried to excuse myself. I say, "Why do you want me? You know, you have here former ministers. They were in Annapolis. They were in Camp David. They were in the tables of negotiation. What do you want from me?" He says, "No, you're there. Tell me what's happening. What's the truth on the ground?" At this stage already, I managed to get my breath back. And I say to him, "You know, there's a problem with your map." "What's the problem?" "It's completely disproportionate. You've taken every outpost where there might be a couple raising a dog and a donkey, and you've put it at the size of the city of Efrat, which is a city of 12,000 people. You can't even see the city of Efrat on your map." Gave a few more arguments about the fact that all the Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria don't compose more than 1.6%. Everybody say, "Wow." No, they don't know the facts. Let's argue without having the facts on the table. Let's sort out what the Palestinian people want, even though we've never asked them what they want. Let's talk about the Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria in AIPAC, even without having a settler present. You know, that's how we do business. 86% of the Jewish population live west of the security barrier. There are facts which need to be known if you want to discuss the topic. Never mind, I understood. My role finished at that stage, and there was a whole big argument discussion within the room. Those are for, those for against. But it was fun. The following day, John Kerry comes. This is before the change of administration, okay? Literally those few weeks. And John Kerry presents exactly the same presentation. Now, there's a clear set of who is allowed to ask questions. Chaim Saban, Martin Indyk, ambassadors, members of Senate, members of Congress, journalists. Me, I'm a schnips. I'm at the bottom of the list. I wasn't allowed to ask a question. So I come to John Kerry afterwards and I say to him, you know, that's not the facts. He said the phrase that all the settlements are built on private-owned land by Palestinians. I said to him, you know, that's not the fact. Those were the days that we were discussing in courts the issue of the houses in Amona. I said to him, look, there's one exemption. It's being dealt with the Supreme Court in Israel. Look how long it's taken to determine whether the houses were built with a permission, without permission. You can't say all the 500,000 people living there are living in houses which were built against the international law. Never mind what his answer was, because we're recorded. I don't want it to be on record. But a few weeks later, there was the event that still Obama's administration didn't veto the vote that there was in the United Nations Security Council. John Kerry gives, again, exactly the same speech he gave just a few weeks beforehand with a slight change. Not all the settlements, some of them. So you're questioning, but you know, at the end of the day, I looked in the mirror and I said, you know what, I've managed to cause him slightly to change his way of presenting things. Which at the end of the day, most of the delegations that I host are not ZOA missions, are J Street, American Friends of Peace Now, all the think tanks, all the leading universities, Columbia University, Harvard Law School, Kennedy School, Georgetown, I think I mentioned it all before. Why? Because we don't know where we're going to meet these people the next time. And it is a challenge to address them, just like your students are doing in campuses. And that's what I'm doing or trying to do in Israel. So I said I was in the IEC, then I was in Saban, and then I got an invitation to the inauguration. Being 3 times in the United States in 8 weeks, you can understand that that's not my usually itinerary of flying abroad, but the circumstances were of such that it was a pleasure to end all 3 trips being in the lawn, in the mall, opposite the White House, and seeing the change of administration of the most powerful person in the world in such silence. You know, there were protests, but if you think of what we saw, the change of guards, the understanding that this is how we change power, and think what happened in previous years, previous decades. How did power move from one side to another? We are living in miraculous times. I think this is where I'll stop, and if we have time, we'll open the floor for questions. Why do I speak to those who don't agree with us? I'll tell you. I'm not trying to convince them. I'm trying to confuse them with the facts, under the belief that too many facts kill a good story. That's my strategy. That's my title. Get too many facts that kill a good story and make them ask questions. Just like you attacked me with a list of facts, which made me ask myself, why have I never used it before? And now I'll start using it. Okay? But the second thing, which I think is more important and more realistic and more pragmatic, I can't guarantee that in the United States there will always be a Republican administration. I can't. It's not within my power. And as a lawyer, when I was asked to brief Jason Greenblatt, I said to him, you as a lawyer, when we come to a negotiation, we try and think what the other side wants to achieve. When we know what they want to achieve, it's easier for us to achieve what we want to achieve. I know what the liberals want to achieve. I'm afraid of what they want to achieve. So I need to try and prepare myself to defend what we want to achieve so they won't achieve what they want to achieve. Now, we can have discussions about the 1967 Green Line. We can have discussions about the 1948 Declaration of Independence, 1947, 1921, 1917. We can have discussions on all these things. We can go to the Second World War, exchange of land, conquering land, punishing countries that opened fire, didn't open fire. You're absolutely right. But what sticks in my head all the time is what Albert Einstein told us, that if we carry on doing what we've always tried to do, we shouldn't receive any other result. And we need to think of different ways to achieve what we want to achieve. Time after time, and you're right in your questioning, we repeat the same arguments. It's a lost battle. Now you see, there's something on the table, which if you ask me, we need to focus on the future. When we're having this discussion about Judea and Samaria, that's not the issue. That's not the topic. I said Prime Minister Netanyahu was right. It's the recognition of the right of the Jewish people for a Jewish state. Now, if we're afraid of not having that state forever, you know what's the real threat? In Egypt, you have 100 million people. The predictions are that in 6 years, 50% of them won't have water. That's a threat. Because you can have, all of a sudden, 50 million people walking towards the nearest water well. You know where's the nearest water well? Israel. Israel is the biggest water well. Because Israel hasn't been following President Trump's speeches, but we haven't heard of global warming. Israel is the only country in the world that has managed to interfere with an act of God, and we today know how to create water. Israel is the only country in the world that the desert is growing smaller despite all the campaign that's going about global warming. That's a living miracle. Now, if we understand that, and if we put that on the table, the role game completely changes. And we can start talking to those liberals who are interested about human rights and looking after interests of people. Hey, there are 50 million people who won't have water in 6 years. How about drawing a plan how they can have water? How about taking Israel's water, Israel's technology, of developing that imaginary intervenence with an act of God into the modern oil? For years, the Arab countries held the whole international world boycott because of oil prices. Israel can be just that small Israel, can be that enterprising holding the whole world. Now that's a change of role games. And I need them on board. Now if I change the discussion to that, that's a few facts, and now they'll go home and ask themselves. I don't even need to use Germany because I'm looking about the future. I hope I've answered you. Very diverse questions, and the truth of the matter, quite challenging as well. Jason Greenblatt, I don't know what his motivation is. I mean, you just said he was here behind this podium. You could have asked him what's his motivation. I can tell you from my meetings with him, with the ambassador, that they are fine people, that they are extremely intelligent, that their hearts are in the right place. We know it by acts they have done prior to them being in position, prior to them being in office. And I have full trust in them. I understand that we are living in a realistic world, that not everything we want, we can achieve. I'm not part of the American administration, part of the Israeli government, to know and understand what are all the different powers or topics that influence a specific decision making. I'm not there. I can tell you, as somebody who was extremely upset about uprooting Jewish homes, Jewish people, digging out people from their graves in the Gaza Strip, that I read an interview with the general who was responsible of that act done by the Israeli army, Gershon Cohen. And he wrote, some might say he's done it way too late, but he wrote, he was asked, why didn't you resign where you were given that order? And he said a twofold answer, maybe three even. He said, number one, if I would have resigned, they would have just brought somebody else to carry on. My resignation wouldn't have stopped the act. But as a believer in the Jewish people who have rights in living in those areas of land, it was important for me to complete the act without having brothers killing one another. And the third thing he says, you know what? It was important for me to carry it out and allow a certain level of protest, that if anybody thinks that it is an easy job to uproot 8,000 people from their houses, and they will think that they can uproot 500,000 people from their houses, they need to understand that 8,000 people was tearing the country apart. Don't even think of uprooting 9,000 people from their homes. Now, is that an explanation? Is that a justification? I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is sometimes we see things being carried out and we don't understand the full picture. I know that there are issues at stake that we might not like some of the issues raised by the big deal that the current administration is raising, but there might be some other factors which we are unaware of. When Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed to the building freeze imposed by him by President Obama, I sat around the table with him. I said to him, Prime Minister, how dare you? It's against your own political base. What were you thinking? Prime Minister Netanyahu looks at me and says to me, Oded, don't teach me politics. Now, I'm a schnips, but I was insulted. What type of answer is that? I asked you a legitimate question. You know, it's against our belief. It's against our agenda. And he did that movement, put me in my place, and said, don't teach me politics. But today, 7, 8 years later, I can say he was a genius. He foresaw things that we all went and protested against. You know why? Because ever since then, the issue of building freeze is not on the table. Did it come up once since then? Numerous times it came up. But Prime Minister Netanyahu proved in 10 months of building freeze, it doesn't promote peace. Now leave me with that notion. It's irrelevant. And now we have an administration that says you can build whatever you want. Now it's not just because there was a change of administration, it's because even the past administration realized that whilst you had the 10 months building freeze, did anything get moved towards peace? Nothing. So let's move it aside. It's irrelevant. So we're very quick to respond about things that we see. You're asking me what are his intentions. I don't even see his intentions. I can only see his acts. And I'm saying that even when I see his acts, knowing where he comes from, knowing what he's done in the past, I'm sure that he's doing the best he can in his position. And I wish we would have had more Jason Greenblatts and more David Friedman in more positions. Our situation would have been much easier. Settlements, communities, excellent question. I can tell you that I had this morning a meeting with a film producer who said to me, Oded, we need to come up with a term different than settlements. Communities wasn't raised because communities is not enough as differentiating from the enormous enterprise that's happening in Judea and Samaria. And his plan is once we come with that term, to actually make a whole film using the new terminology and then spreading it on social media so we can start creating the change in terminology. So English is not my mother tongue, but if any of you have got any suggestion of a click, one word that can describe what's happening in Judea and Samaria, I can just give you an example that he said we should, instead of using settlers, we should call them returners, okay? Just to try and give you ideas as to where to think of a term that we can use in order to use that, okay? Because in Hebrew, the terms are only positive. I understand that when we translate it to English, it's problematic. When we turn it into French, it's even worse. It's completely determinantal, but I'm with you on the same page in the same book. It doesn't matter. It's between me and him, okay? But you can forward me the words, and then that will be used in the script. Regarding ways of punishment and what should be the response to firing the missiles. There's a problem in both questions. Both questions ask, what's the response? I don't want to be in a situation where I'm responding. When we have a terror attack and there's a Jew being murdered, we have some people who live in Judea and Samaria and say, oh, we want a Zionistic answer. We want now a whole new settlement to be built. And go and look on the media. I condemn it. You know why I condemn it? Because we should be allowed to build in Judea and Samaria 365 days a year, regardless if we have terror attacks or we don't have terror attacks. We need to reach a situation that no missiles are being shot towards anywhere. I don't need to respond. The reality needs to be of such nature that that is not on the table. Now you have politicians who come and say, oh, we want to go and demolish now Gaza. I'm going to kill Hania. We've got endless leaders who you can quote who said the most fabulous answers that I'm sure if I'll just now say it, you will all start clapping. There are two problems with those answers. They never came into fruition, and we see the missiles carrying on flying. So what I'm saying is we need to try and find ways not to carry on doing what we did in the past because we want to receive a different result. Take, for example, the period that we had terrorist bombers and buses blew themselves up. The question wasn't what the punishment will happen to that specific terrorist. The security services of Israel changed their tactics and brought into a reality that, thank God, for many years we haven't had any more suicide bombers. How did we do it? Change of course of action, more intelligence, find the people with motivation before they wake out of bed. You change the form of question. Don't ask me how do you want to respond. If I would have been smart enough and strong enough, I wouldn't have responded, not because of weakness, but because I would have thought of a specific tactics to eliminate that threat. And unfortunately, we have leaders who fall time after time into the trap. And then you know what they compare it? The poor people in the south, they have tens, if not hundreds of missiles flying over their houses. That's already become norm. No response. You have 2 missiles flying over Tel Aviv, then you respond. So what do the people of Israel say? Oh, are they more important? I don't want to be in that situation. I don't want to have a comparison. I don't want to have a price list. One Jew killed, this is the amount of houses we get. 2 Jews killed, this is the amount of houses we get. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be responsive. I want to be the one who initiates the situation. BBC, CNN, listen, it's all about the money. Who stands behind it? Who funds it? We know it. We understand it. Thank God today we have alternative ways of production. We have alternative ways of producing. And you know what? I can tell you in Israel, 2015, the most dominant, popular news site was Ynet. After the elections in 2015, their rates dropped, dramatically, because people understood that that's a source of inaccurate information feeding for a specific political agenda, and people just lost interest. Okay. Haaretz is terrible. Where does Haaretz have the most influence? Okay. In the English version. I can't stop everything, but I can think how I'm going to battle it in a different mechanism in order to try and influence. Ken, your question is spot on, because we've had endless meetings with the Prime Minister in the last 10 years. We've gone from a quote of the previous president, not one more brick, just wait until the elections. The elections were over. Just wait until he goes out of the White House. He went out of the White House. Just wait until I make the new president. Just wait, just wait, just wait. For me in Efrat, it's hard to complain because, as I said, there was a political situation in the government formed in 2013 where Naftali Bennett was elected and Tzipi Livni was elected. They both wanted contradicting things. Tzipi Livni wanted another building freeze. Naftali Bennett said, I just got elected. I'm not going to agree for a building freeze. Like Israeli politics, the compromise was that there won't be a building freeze, and instead, in order to build a trust with the Palestinians, they let go Palestinians out of prison. And every time they let prisoners out, terrorists out, Naftali Bennett got building permits. So in Efrat, I got a growth of 60% of my population. So Efrat is growing rapidly. But what has happened during the time from the Bush administration all the way until 2013, that was extremely painful for the Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria, the Jewish hometowns and cities in Judea and Samaria, because no building plans were promoted. Because every single building plan that, in order to be promoted, had to reach 7 times the signature of the Prime Minister. And Sharon promised Bush not to promote any more building in Judea and Samaria. And during all those 13 years, what was marketed and built was old plans that were in the drawers. No, that process of going forward didn't happen. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu is right when he shows you the charts and look, see what happened in the last few years. Look what I did. He's right because those programs, those plans to promote more building were in the pipeline. They didn't reach the final line of being marketed, and you didn't see construction happening on the ground. Hopefully, President Trump will be in the White House for another 4 years after the elections, and hopefully in Israel we won't have the government that you asked me about, and hopefully those plans will be able to come into reality. What I can say, from meeting the Prime Minister, from seeing the plans which are on the table, the building restrictions that we had in the past, that it only has to be in the blocks, that it has to be adjourned to the existing communities, all those have been out of the drawing plan. They're planning now all over Judea and Samaria in massive amounts. Until you actually see tractors building and digging, unfortunately it takes time, but hopefully that time will come soon. Thank you very, very much. And keep up the good work because we need good friends like you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.